Good afternoon, fine people. This is about to be the best video I've ever made. I've got my Diet Mountain Dew. This is what I typically call my mid-afternoon, even though it's actually 5:30, or afternoon Diet Mountain Dew. I like me some Diet Mountain Dew every now and then because it gives me a little bit of flavor. I just hate drinking water. It gives me a little bit of flavor. It's not anything, there's no sugar in it, has a little bit of caffeine, so it gives me just a slight pick-me-up and adds a little bit more flavor and eventfulness to my life. But I'm not here to talk about Diet Mountain Dew today. What I'm here to talk about is not even the current state of affairs, but largely kind of what we can do as humans. God, this sounds so cliche, but make the world a better place? I'll just leave it at that. So if you get on your phone and you log into whatever social media you tend to use, which for most people that's pretty much all of them, you might find that the world is burning to the ground, or in the very smaller or limited sense, that everything's just pretty much negative. Man, it just got really dark in here. You might find that it seems that people just really hate each other or just simply can't get along with one another. And that's essentially what I want to talk about today. Because, and I don't want to talk about this, this seems to have been happening for quite a while now. So I'm not just talking about this because of what's currently going on with COVID, police brutality, racial injustice. This, I think, was kind of a problem long before that. I think social media just amplifies the negative of humans to such a high degree. So if we want to get out of this kind of negative mindset, this negative attitude, this kind of negative energy from looking at social media or just logging into the internet these days and just seeing or seemingly feeling that everything has just kind of gone to shit and it seems that the world is just a shitty place to live. If we want to get out of that, it really comes down to having more contact with reality, what's kind of really going on, and better relationships with our fellow humans. So when we talk about having better relationships with our fellow brothers and sisters, we tend to talk a lot about empathy. Kind of empathy kind of gets thrown around a lot these days. And what I mean by that, and we're going to kind of get into a little bit of the science around empathy, but there seems to be that there's this kind of floating, whatever you want to call it, this floating thing floating around these days where we need to be better listeners. We need to try our best to understand what somebody else's life is like, what it's like to be in their shoes, what their experience is, what their perception of the world is. And when we talk about this, we sometimes generally use the word empathy. And I use the word empathy a lot too, and when I use it, I kind of use it in a very general sense. So it is a basic fact that, and really who knows how long this is going to be a basic fact with the rise of technology, but it is a basic fact that we have to communicate with other humans, and we are just in contact with a lot of humans every day of our lives. Now, I understand a lot of people might be working from home these days, so their contact with humans is limited, but we have this thing that is true to our nature that we crave. We need to be around other humans to feel like our life is generally positive. And for all the people that think they're introverts out there, or might actually be introverts, no one likes to be alone, and no one is going to feel better being by themselves. Now I understand, and I'm one of them, I like to have my alone time where I can do some of the stuff I want to do and like to do, but for the most part I like being around other people. And this is just widely known, just for the simple fact that the worst punishment in prison is solitary confinement. Being alone with one's own mind is the worst punishment you can partake on another human, which is pretty damn crazy. So anyways, kind of backtracking, we are always going to be in contact with other humans, and if we want our life to have a general positive feeling, we need to not only have contact with other humans, but we have to understand how to relate to another human and how to kind of create positive relationships. And this is kind of going back to empathy. So when we think of empathy, in the most general sense, we think about kind of trying to understand something from another person's perspective. So a situation happens, and we know, or you should know, that your perception of the world is going to be different from somebody else's perception of the world. There might be, whatever the situation may be, there might be similar information, but how each person digests that information, how that information enters their mind is going to be different. So two people experience what you would think is the same situation, and two people kind of come out with two different views of the world. So I've been reading, it's on Kindle, it's a really good book called Rationality: From AI to Zombies by Eliezer Yudkowsky. Really long book, it's like 1,000 pages, but it's just like accumulation of essays. But anyways, he in one essay he mentions the example, there's that classic example of if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? And he kind of uses this fictional example of two people are arguing over this, but two people are using two completely different definitions of what sound means. One might be using sound, the definition of sound being sound waves actually like penetrating your eardrum, or sound waves in general, while the other person might be thinking of sound as an actual experience. And obviously the argument never goes anywhere because they're arguing past each other because they're not even using the same definition. And this is very similar to two people experiencing the same situation and two people coming out of it with two completely different points of view, two completely different experiences. And this is where empathy comes in. And this is where we have to acknowledge that somebody else's experience of the world is going to be different, and the conclusion they get from a certain situation might be different than ours. And we have to really respect this if we want to get along with other humans and we want to create positive relationships. So when we have to acknowledge somebody's experience, and this is one of the most important skills and really one of the first skills any person that wants to be a coach in any endeavor really needs to learn. So if you're coaching a group class, and we've all maybe been around those clients that kind of annoy us the most, and usually I find clients that might annoy you the most have some sort of thing going on that reflects something going on in you as well. But anyways, we have to understand that what is going on in your head is not going on in somebody else's head, and we kind of have to take a step back, put our ego to the side, and try to kind of give the client what they want and feed into, validate their experience and kind of give them what they want out of the experience, what they're looking for. And I'll get into that a little bit later, kind of like the overall goal or message of this video. So, it is important we have, in the general sense of what most of us think of as empathy. And because if we can't first, on the very first basis, think about what other people are experiencing and understanding that might be different than us, what our experience may be, and working to a kind of cooperative conclusion, we're not going to get anywhere. But this is also where I want to talk about the downsides of kind of a textbook definition of empathy, or I guess sort of the downside of this. And I want to start this off by, so Paul Bloom does he's a psychologist. He does a lot of research on empathy and the negative kind of or the negative side of empathy. He's been on Sam Harris's podcast quite a bit of times. I encourage you to listen to all those. And if you don't even want to listen to me here, read this entire book, Behave by Robert Sapolsky. It's a giant one, and it just goes into all the dirty details and research of just human behavior on so many different fronts. Phenomenal book. That's going to have way more information than me, but I'm still here. Let me read this short section of this kind of interview article with Paul Bloom. Let's see. Where are we? This is Paul Bloom. By empathy, I mean feeling the feelings of other people. So if you're in pain and I feel your pain, I am feeling empathy towards you. If you're being anxious, I pick up your anxiety. If you're sad and I pick up your sadness, I'm being empathetic. And that's different from compassion. Compassion means I give your concern weight, I value it, I care about you, but I don't necessarily pick up your feelings. And then he goes on to say a lot of people think this is a verbal distinction and that it doesn't matter that much, which maybe I get that. But there's he talks about the evidence about empathy and compassion activating different parts of the brain. And this is, if you want to just dive into more of the research, look him up. But this is where we kind of have to dive into the reality and the facts of situations. So the general synopsis of the negative side of empathy that he talks about is because essentially empathy, you're getting in the feelings of another person. It's not going to help you make rational moral judgments. So he uses the case, and I'll just use this example that he makes somewhere, or I think it's him that makes it. And there's research and studies done on this, if you show somebody a picture of one little kid dying, or they just tell you this kid is experiencing all these negative things like lack of nutrition, lack of food, lack of water, people are going to be much more likely to donate money or be very compassionate or empathetic towards that person. Now, as soon as you add more people into that picture, so you add the kid's sister, the amount they want to donate, or the amount of empathy they feel actually goes down. And then if you extrapolate this to a picture of 20 people, the situation is exactly the same, but people are much less likely to donate or feel empathy or want to do good by all these people. So the one person is very emotionally salient and we're much more likely to help. 20 people is a greater number of just kind of overall suffering, and which should make us want to do more and contribute more to help, isn't as emotionally salient, and we're actually less likely to do good and help. So that's sort of the negative side of empathy. And so this is kind of where I want to sum all of this up, is we first have to fully acknowledge and understand somebody's experience is going to be different than ours. They're going to have a different perception of the world than ours, and that's important, and that's how we can come to a cooperative relationship in the first place. But on the flip side of that, we have to understand sort of the facts of the situation, whatever that may be, and not be so emotionally tied to the relationship, or we don't want to accept sort of the feelings of the other person that might make us make unrational, immoral judgments that's not good for anybody. And that's where we kind of have to act, and this is where Paul Bloom kind of makes the distinction between empathy and compassion, where we need to be compassionate, where we understand somebody's view, and we want to work towards a solution and we give their concerns or whatever it may be, we give it weight, but we're also not just we're not just getting all the feelings of that person and the emotions of that person dumped on us, where we're ending up making irrational decisions. And so this is where I think kind of the final wrap up here is where we need to think of the concept of win-win, which I believe Stephen Covey was the original person that kind of came up with this concept in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So in any relationship, obviously there's lose-lose, win-lose, lose-win, or win-win. So lose-lose, obviously both parties lose. You don't want that. Win-lose, maybe I receive some benefits out of a relationship, out of a situation, but the other person either negatively either get some sort of negative cost, or they just don't see any sort of positive or upside from whatever conclusion we're trying to reach. And while that might be good for us, it's probably not going to help us build any long-term relationships, and we might even get sort of a bad rap because, oh wow, this dude was a dick and this is how he treated me. And so typically the best solution is going to be win-win, where in order, again, we're going back to the first step, the initial basis is to understand somebody's experience, empathize with it or understand it, give it weight, understand that it's different than yours. But win-win is where we need to be able to find kind of mutual kind of benefits or conclusions out of a situation, where we're still staying with integrity with our values, what we want, but we're also thinking about the other person and helping them reach a similar positive conclusion. And I think the key in this is where we really have to step or set our ego aside and kind of get out of our own head and kind of be a little bit more outward focused. And I think when you do that, or when you start to practice that, because this is a skill that will always have to be practiced, but when you start doing that, you'll realize life is much more beautiful and much more rewarding and just much more enjoyable when you start to be a little bit more outward focused and you're not so caught up in your ego, in your head, and only concerned with your experience and your perception of the world. So, long story short, with all the crazy shit that we see on social media or that we think is actually going on in the world, to actually strive towards that cliche of making the world a better place, we have to understand somebody's experience, understand their perception of the world is never going to meet ours. They might be relying on limited information, we might be, or how they respond to a given situation or information is always going to be different. No one has the same genes, environment, parents as you, never grew up in the same environment as you, so everyone's experience and perception of the world is going to be different. And if we want to move on to a positive future or to create positive relationships, we have to incorporate this kind of empathy, this sort of relationship where we understand their experience, but also we're not making kind of emotionally tied decisions. We can search for kind of rational solutions, rational conclusions, where we're both putting our needs and the other person's needs at front and looking to find a conclusion that is win-win, where we're both benefiting. And maybe, just maybe, we can create a better future with this in mind. Like I said, if you don't want to listen to me, read this book and read Paul Bloom's work as well. Toodaloo.